I used to like the silence of working overnight at the Willow Bridge Inn, something about the smooth hum of the air conditioner. The empty hallways echoing my footsteps made the place feel like it belonged only to me. It was a small hotel, 3 floors, maybe 40 rooms, and unless there was a sports tournament in town, we were never even half full. On weeknights, you could practically count the guests on one hand. My shift was 10 to 6, sun gone and moon bruised in the sky, a slot reserved for the insomniacs and the unlucky. I'd usually spend the hours half dozing behind the front desk, paperwork finished within the first hour. Sometimes, if it was especially dead, I'd stream old sitcoms on my phone in the office behind the glass partition, occasionally glancing out into the dim lobby with its old floral couches and drab carpet. The quiet was the sort that hummed in your ears and got into your bones, a quiet that made you listen for things you weren't sure you'd heard. That night was ordinary until just after 11. I remember because I was watching the second-hand drag along the office clock, thinking how slow time felt when your body wanted nothing more than a warm bed. That's when I heard the sharp buzz at the front door. Guests locked out, late arrivals, or maybe a traveler passing through in need of a bed. The buzz echoed through the tiled space, bouncing off shadow corners. I pressed a button under the desk and watched the entrance doors swing open. A man walked in, tall and thin, maybe mid-40s, a faded baseball cap drawn low over his forehead, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't seem out of place, but there was something about the way he moved. Quiet, a little too slow, as if he was studying the room and me before he gave in to the normal rhythm of checking in. He stepped up to the counter and asked if there were rooms available, his voice low and flat. I nodded, gave him price, and he handed over a chipped credit card. I ran it through the terminal, heard the beep of approval, and handed him a key card for room 214. He looked at me then, not the usual polite glance or tired smile other travelers offered, but a stare lingering far too long. His eyes were empty and unblinking, his face hanging somewhere between blankness and the beginnings of a smirk. I found myself holding my breath until he finally turned and headed toward the elevator. The moment passed, but a ripple of unease fanned out inside me. Chalk it up to the graveyard shift and too much caffeine, I told myself, but still, I kept glancing at the security monitors, watching for him to enter his room. The screen showed nothing unusual, just shadows, blank doors, and my own tired reflection in the office glass. An hour later, I looked up from the front desk to see him again, not in his room, but sitting in the dark lounge area, facing the cold blue glow of the television, which was off. He just sat there, back rigid, eyes never leaving the screen. I watched him for a while. He didn't move, didn't pick up his phone or flip through a magazine. The seconds ticked by, and he never even shifted. I tried to ignore the chill prickling under my skin. Guests hung out in the lobby sometimes, waiting for takeout or pacing the carpet when sleep wouldn't come. But there was something about the way he sat, motionless, never blinking or looking away, that made the air feel heavy, like I was holding my breath for too long and just hadn't realized it. I made an excuse to cross the lobby, pretending to check the vending machines, and the hair rose on my neck when I felt his eyes track me the whole way. I made it back behind the desk without looking at him directly, but could still feel his gaze burning through the glass partition. The next part is harder to explain. Around 1 a.m., curiosity, or maybe nerves, got the best of me. I double-checked the reservation system, intending to see if I'd properly checked him in. That's when I noticed that room 214 was still listed as vacant. I scrolled back through the check-in history. No entry for that man. No card charge. Nothing. My skin prickled. I checked the key card log. No record of anyone entering 214. My eyes flicked up. The man was still in the lounge, just sitting, staring straight ahead. And I started to realize I had let someone into the hotel, into my space, and he wasn't supposed to be there at all. After that moment when I realized he wasn't in the system, was never checked in at all, I sat frozen for a long second, heart hammering. How had I just let someone like that in? alone in the night, with no one else around to notice? I told myself to stay calm, but my hands shook as I stared at the empty hallway beyond the lobby. The man's presence pulled at the shadows like a black hole. You feel like you're underwater, try to scream, but no sound comes. I debated calling the police right then, but what would I say? That a man who wasn't registered was sitting quietly in the lobby, sitting like a statue, watching me? The clock ticked. 1:15 a.m. I kept my eyes glued to the cameras. The man remained motionless in the lounge, just sitting there facing the TV, which remained stubbornly off. Minutes stretched and twisted, like some terrible elastic band pulling tighter and tighter inside my chest. Then, at around 1:30, the man suddenly stood, slow, deliberate movements. He turned his head to look at me, and my heart dropped to the floor. No smile, no expression, just cold, dead eyes boring into mine. He walked toward the hallway near the bathrooms, a spot half shrouded by shadows where the lights flickered weakly. I couldn't tear my gaze away, even though every instinct screamed to look down, to break eye contact. He lingered there, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. Then, as if satisfied whatever unseen game was playing out, he turned and shuffled back to a spot in the lounge. By 2 a.m., my body was screaming for coffee or some sign of normalcy. I tried to focus on the computer screen, fingers trembling as I opened and closed tabs, randomly clicking through email and the reservation system, none of it sticking. I was caught in a loop of paranoia, watching, waiting, guessing what this ghostly man's plan might be. He didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't use a phone or read anything. He just watched the blank television, like it held secrets only he could see. His silence screamed louder than any words could. Heat gathered behind my eyes. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was homeless, mentally ill, lost, or looking for shelter. Maybe, but what about the stolen card? The fact he never went to the room? The way he moved as if he belonged and didn't belong all at once? At 2:45, I called my manager. Her voice was tired but steady on the other end of the line. I told her everything. How the system showed no record of him, how he'd been wandering all night, how cold and empty his stare was. "Keep an eye on him," she said quietly. "Call the cops if anything seems off or threatening." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. My fingers gripped the phone tight, muscles aching. After I hung up, everything felt different. Every noise, no matter how small, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the heating system, the distant drip of water from the upstairs shower, was a jolt to my nerves. At 3 a.m., I noticed he was closer to the front desk, only about 15 feet away, his eyes still locked on me, unblinking. I pretended to type on the keyboard, heart thudding so loudly I was certain he could hear it. My breath came fast and shallow. His eyes didn't wander. They burned right through me, like he was waiting for something or someone. Then a buzzer rang from the door. I hoped it was the police, but it was only a late guest returning. The man's head turned slowly to watch the guest walk by, his eyes following like a predator studying prey. I snapped back to the camera feed, and just as expected, he disappeared again. I held my breath. My stomach twisted when I saw him standing outside a guest room on the first floor, staring at an unoccupied door, like a shadow stalking its next victim. I had no idea what his intentions were, but I was sure they were bad. By 4:10, 2 officers had arrived. Finally, relief washed over me when I showed them the man sitting calmly in the lounge. They questioned him, asked if he was a guest. He gave no clear answer. One officer came back to me. The card he gave me was stolen. No booking, no reservation. He's been sneaking around all night. They hauled him away without resistance. I slumped back in my chair. My hands were numb. The man had spent hours inside with me or watching me, and I hadn't even realized what I'd let in. That was the longest, most terrifying night of my life. The hours after the cops left felt heavier than all the dread that came before. I stayed at the front desk because the thought of walking into the darkened hallways alone was unbearable. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every creak from the old wooden floors made my heart jump. My fingers trembled every time I reached the phone or glanced at the security monitors, half expecting that pale, blank stare to be staring back at me again. My manager told me to take it easy, gave me permission to end my shift early if needed, but I couldn't leave, not until I felt some sense of control in the building I had once called my workplace. The rest of the night was a haunted echo. The man's silence had imprinted itself on the air. I kept imagining him just beyond the edges of the camera's view, lurking in the shadows, blending into the darkness like smoke. I thought I saw movement sometimes, a vague silhouette in the hallway, a whisper of footsteps that died away before I could pinpoint them. But every glance down the corridor revealed only the familiar emptiness. By 4:30 a.m., my exhaustion battled with my fear. My body ached from tension and lack of sleep, but I couldn't let my guard down. Near the end of the shift, an older couple finally checked in. They noticed my pale face and shaking hands and offered a warm smile that felt like a lifeline. I forced a grateful return smile and decided to take a moment behind the desk to collect myself. But then the bell on the front door buzzed again. I jumped hard, heart slamming against my ribs. The door opened slowly, the cold night air spilling inside. Nobody came through. I looked outside through the glass doors. Empty parking lot, no car headlights, just shadows swelling under the flickering street lamps. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe the exhaustion was finally making me see ghosts in the dark. But I knew better. The night can fool you, but the fear? That's something real. Story 2, the bell under the desk. Every night feels like a test of nerve when you're working the graveyard shift at a small rural motel. The kind of place so quiet the silence is almost physical, thick as fog and just as heavy. I never expected the nights to be eventful. Honestly, I thought it would be boring and maybe a little lonely, but safe. I was wrong. The motel is family-owned, 2 floors with maybe 25 rooms. I work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., usually enough time for 1 or 2 check-ins if someone's passing through late. But mostly it's just me alone in an old building that groans and settles like an ancient beast. There's a main lobby area with the front desk, my post most nights, small chairs for waiting guests, a coffee machine always bubbling, and a little rack full of brochures for local attractions no one ever looks at. Behind the desk is a hallway that leads to the back office where I sometimes retreat to nap on a couch if the night gets too slow. There's a little speaker system there that dings whenever someone buzzes the front door or rings the bell on the desk. I've been working here long enough to know the usual night sounds of the motel. The clock ticking, the occasional footsteps from hallways, the elevators creaking as it moves between floors, the humming of the old heater turning on and off. Nothing scary. Until that night, it started around 2 a.m. I was in the back office, halfway through a half-hearted nap, when I heard the bell ring sharply from the front desk. Half asleep, I assumed it was one of the guests coming down for a midnight snack or maybe a smoke. I got up, rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, and walked to the lobby, but I froze. No one was there. The lobby was empty. I checked the front door, locked and closed. No footsteps echoed in the hallway. No car headlights in the parking lot. Thinking maybe I had imagined it, I went back to the couch. But just as I was about to sit down, the bell rang again. Louder this time. Insistent. I stood, heart starting to race. I moved through to the lobby slowly, eyes scanning every corner. Nobody. I called out softly, half expecting a guest to answer, but got only silence in return. Then I noticed a pale hand, a hand creeping up from under the front desk, fingers reaching out slowly to press the bell again. I jumped back, startled so hard I almost fell over a chair. The hand disappeared as quickly as it had come. I didn't know what to do. I was scared stiff, my voice stuck and my heart pounding in my throat. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but then thought better of it. What could I say? Someone hiding under the desk? Sound impossible. I went back to the monitor where 4 different cameras showed the lobby, hallways, and parking lot. Nothing at first. Then, out of nowhere, the image flickered and a shadow moved, slid out from behind the desk on hands and knees. A tall figure, hunched under a dark hoodie, face obscured. He crawled out into view and started pacing the lobby like a patient hunter, looking around as if waiting for something or someone. The door at the end of the hallway rattled once. He stopped and turned his head sharply. The doorknob rattled slowly once, then silence. I locked the door of the back office with shaking hands, backing away until the lock clicked. I kept watching the monitor as the man walked around the lobby, stopping occasionally to stare out the glass doors. Minutes passed in a dreadful slow crawl. Then I saw flashing blue and red lights at the entrance from the parking lot cameras. The police had arrived. The man bolted, disappeared down the hallway, out the back exit, gone before officers made it inside. They searched the parking lot and surrounding area. Nothing. That night shattered my confidence. I always thought the night shift was just a lazy, quiet grind. I was wrong. There's something about the darkness, the empty halls, the quiet that invites things you don't want to meet. And from that night on, every time that bell rings at the front desk, I get a terrible feeling I'm not alone. Story 3. The car that never left. Working the night shift at the Gray Pines gas station meant long hours of boredom pierced by moments of sharp unease. The station sat on a lonely stretch of County Road 11, miles from anywhere, where cars rarely had reasons to stop unless desperate or lost. I'd taken the job because I liked the quiet, the steady pace, and because it paid the bills. Nights were mostly dull, refilling shelves, sweeping floors, and watching old movies when no one was around. But then one night, everything changed. It started with a car, a dark, shiny car that pulled in precisely around 1:30 a.m. Always the same one, always with its headlights off, engine quietly running. At first, it looked harmless enough, maybe some tired driver catching a break. But something didn't sit right. The car never left. Sometimes it would sit for an hour or more, sometimes all night. And inside, on the driver's side, you'd see a shadowed silhouette, sitting still, watching. The nagging feeling pressed on me, like the car was waiting for something or someone. I mentioned it to my co-worker Max when he dropped by for coffee one night. He told me he'd noticed the same thing. But Max also told me the car had no license plates, like it didn't want to be found. One night, a couple of customers warned me to be careful. They saw people lurking close to the car, whispering and scanning the parking lot like they were hunting. The strangest part? When the car was confronted, the driver would pretend he didn't speak English and then drive off fast, only to return a few hours later. One time, 2 new cars pulled into the lot, also dark and without plates, following the first car like predators trailing prey. I started carrying a knife in my pocket and kept a close eye on the parking lot every time I stepped outside. I began checking surveillance cameras too often, watching the car's movements and the shadows that flickered around it. One night, when the lot was empty except for me, I saw the driver struggling to get out, a look of panic on his face. Then a second figure appeared from the darkness, moving silently up to the car. They spoke in low voices I couldn't understand. A chill ran down my spine. I realized this wasn't just a strange driver. This was something darker, something waiting in the night to trap anyone careless enough to stay too long. The car became a fixture in my nights. No matter what time I glanced up, it was always there, engine ticking quietly under the hood, no headlights to betray its presence. I started noticing things, small things, footsteps that echoed in the dark beyond the pumps, movement in the periphery of the cameras that vanished when I looked directly at it, whispers of conversations carried on the wind, or maybe just my imagination playing tricks. One night, Max pulled me aside after his shift ended. His face was pale, eyes wide with an expression I couldn't read. "You ever see the way the driver watches us?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "There's something off. And those other cars that showed up last week, they aren't just hanging out. It's like a pack, waiting for something." I started carrying a knife, not that it made me feel any safer. It was during one of my breaks that I saw the driver struggling to get out one night. His shoulders were tense, sweat gleaming in the faint glow of the station lights. Then another figure emerged from the shadows, a second man, pale as moonlight, moving silently towards a car. They spoke in low tones I couldn't catch. I tried to tune out, but the feeling of dread prickled at my skin like icy fingers. Suddenly, the first man turned and looked right at me. For a moment, his eyes glowed faintly. A horrible chill ran down my spine. I pretended I hadn't seen anything. That night, after my shift ended, I locked all the doors behind me and hurried to my car, the knife still clutched in my hand. I knew this wasn't just a car anymore. It was a hunt, and I wasn't the prey yet. That night, the air felt thicker, heavier, as if the darkness itself was pressing closer under the weak glow of the street lamps. The car sat where it always did, engine humming softly, but headlights never flicking on. I scanned the empty lot through the cracked window of the gas station, fingers curling tighter around my coffee cup for warmth, or maybe for courage. Then I saw movement near the edge of the lot. Two figures shrouded in black, stepping carefully from behind the trees. Their shapes swayed oddly, almost like they were gliding rather than walking. I blinked, heart hammered in my chest. One of them raised a hand, waving but not in greeting. It was a slow, deliberate gesture, like a warning or a signal. I swallowed a scream as the figures melted back into the shadows. I locked all the doors behind the counter, as if that would keep danger out. But the feeling didn't leave. It grew. On the cameras, I noticed strange reflections, ghostly shapes flickering at the edges of the lenses. The radio crackled with static, then silence. I tried calling Max, but the line was dead. When I told the others about what I'd seen, they nodded knowingly, but warned me to never stay inside the building alone after dark. From then on, every time I heard the sound of the engine quietly starting, or the weightless footsteps near the pumps, I felt a chill that no amount of coffee could chase away. Because out there in the lonely night, something was definitely waiting, hunting. The days bled together in a haze of restless thoughts and flickering surveillance footage. The car remained, always there, lurking a lot, an ominous shadow that refused to leave. One night, around 2 a.m., the radio began crackling with static, the old speakers popping and hissing like something trying to communicate through the white noise. I fiddled with the dial, trying to clear the reception, but the noise persisted, weaving an unsettling rhythm that wrapped around the station like a shroud. Suddenly, the static shifted. Fragments of whispered voices, faint and broken, slipped through the speaker. Words I couldn't fully make out, but ominous all the same. A chill ran down my spine. I looked outside just in time to see the figures near the car moving with unnatural swiftness, darting between the pumps, vanishing and reappearing like wraiths. In the reflection of the glass door, their faces flickered, distorted, pale and hollow. I knew then that this wasn't just a waiting game. It was a hunt. I locked the doors and sat behind the counter, phone pressed in my ear, ready to call the police at the first sign of trouble. But the night held its breath. The car engine thrummed softly through the darkness, the shadows pulsing with life, waiting for a moment of weakness. That night, after closing up the store and locking the doors, I felt eyes on me, not from any person I could see, but from the night itself. The dark hung heavy like a blanket soaked with silence, the kind that presses too close and makes your skin crawl. As I was about to leave, the engine of that dark car came alive. The driver slid behind the wheel and started the vehicle, the soft growl of the motor a sinister lullaby. I gripped my keys tighter and glanced around the station, every shadow threatening to wrap around me. Suddenly, headlights flicked on, cutting through the black like piercing knives. The car lurched forward, moving slowly toward the exit, but then stopped abruptly. The driver's door opened and the figure stepped out, his face obscured by the night, but unmistakably watching me. He moved with purpose down the lot, heading straight for the gas station entrance. My breath caught. I had no way to call for help. My phone was in the car. I backed away, heart thudding violently against my ribs. At that moment, a second car pulled up silently behind the first, Another figure stepping out, eyes glowing faintly in the eerie light. I bolted toward my car, fumbled with the lock, desperate for the safety of metal and distance. The engine roared as I twisted the key and sped away, the dark figure standing motionless as I disappeared into the night. The gas station still sits on that lonely road, a beacon of lost souls or predators. And sometimes, at exactly 1:30 a.m., the car returns. Waiting, watching. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for keys, heart pounding with the frantic rhythm of a trapped animal. The dark figures had begun moving toward the gas station, silent and deliberate, like shadows detached from any human warmth. I ducked behind the counter for one last breath of courage before I ran outside. My flashlight cut jagged swaths through blackness, blade-like in the heavy night air. The first figure emerged from the car's shadow, its face a blur beneath the hood. Its eyes burned faintly with something unholy. I couldn't tell if they were alive or empty sockets, holding memories that weren't mine. The second figure halted at the lot's edge, as if waiting for an invitation to cross. The engine still softly droned, but no headlights had appeared. A sudden flash of headlight behind me jerked my head. A passing car on the nearby highway was a distant beacon of safety, but too far, too fast. With the dark figures closing in, I threw open the driver's door and dove in, slamming it shut before the cold fingers of the night could reach me. I started the engine, tires spinning and skidding on the gravel, as the gas station disappeared behind me. Shrouded in fog and shadow, I knew deep down the nightmare wasn't over. That car, those shadows, they waited for the next night shift.